Good day, and welcome to the Prism of Perspective podcast. Today's our maiden voyage, and the intention of today is to lay down an outline of how the Prism of Perspective reflects the world in which we live and gives us tools and opportunities to engage in that world in an effective way to create the lives we most desire. Today, I'm going to be walking you through the model so that you get an opportunity to see how our beliefs, our energy, and our presence act as filters and levers engaging with the world to create a unique experience that we perceive to be the only reality available, but in truth is the reality that we have created based on the way we've engaged with the raw materials. So with that, I'm going to dive in. You'll notice in the graphics there that from the left side of the prism, there's a white light coming in, and I've labeled that life. And the reason for that is I'd like you to think about life metaphorically, just like white light. And so when we think about white light, it comes into a prism and then it is refracted, and it contains all of the colors of the rainbow. What is also true is that life comes at us with unlimited opportunities contained within it. And based on the way that our prism, which is made up of our beliefs, our energy, and our presence, engage with that world, we create a world and a life experience that can vary radically, regardless of what those initial circumstances appeared to be. So let's talk about what those things are. So the beliefs that we hold in what I'm going to define as three different big categories. We have our identity beliefs, which are really the beliefs about who we are in the world. So we see ourselves a particular way, and then we end up fulfilling that. It acts as a thermostat, kind of giving us a range of temperatures within which we can show up in the world, but it bounds who we are. And that bounding is based on who we expect ourselves to be in the world. The mid-level of this is how we perceive others. So I call it the others beliefs. And in that way, we perceive others on a scale of really being fully loving, unconditionally loving to them. To the other opposite end of that spectrum would be to kind of have hatred for, or dislike for, or loathing for. And the way that we expect to engage with people, the perception that we have, the beliefs we have about how we're going to feel about them is largely going to influence the way that we experience other people. And then the bottom part of this prism on that side of beliefs is our global beliefs. And that is, what do we believe to be true about the world? And so when we look at that, there are some really big elements that I want you to consider. And they also exist on a spectrum. One of those spectrums that we would look at is, do we live in a dangerous world, or do we live in a safe world? And the reason that that really makes a big difference is if we perceive the world to be dangerous, then we're going to come from a very defensive space and not be able to be as creative as we'd otherwise be. Imagine that you were living in a very dangerous world. You'd have to take a lot of the resources that you have at your disposal and use them to defend what you currently have. On the flip side, if you live in a very safe world, you can take those resources and you can use them to create new great things. And so the perception of how the world shows up is going to greatly impact your ability to create that which you want in the world. The second area to think about there is on the spectrum of scarcity versus abundance. If you perceive the world to be abundant, then your ability to engage with other people is expanded because you're not feeling as if you're fighting over limited resources. Conversely, if you feel the world is scarce, then the way you're engaging with other people is always a negotiation or a fight because you believe you're fighting over a limited amount, a singular slices out of a pie, rather than in abundance, we imagine the ability to create an unlimited amount of pies. And so the way we think about and engage the world is going to be significantly different based on our beliefs about scarcity and abundance. The third part of this I want you to think about, which is really super critical, is do you believe that you live in a world that is dynamic and that is constantly evolving, and that you, as part of that, are also constantly evolving and have the capability to grow and develop? Or do you see things as static and fixed? It's almost, in a way, like the difference between a Newtonian physics understanding of cause and effect and everything is as it is, and what we've now come to understand in the quantum realm, where there's a lot more variability. And so with the freedom to continue to grow and develop and evolve, we have the opportunity to engage in the world that is also continuing to evolve with much more creativity. So I'm going to come back for a moment and just touch base on each of those and go a little bit deeper. So let's first look at identity beliefs. There are many things that incorporate your identity beliefs, but 4 of them we're going to speak about today are your vision, your purpose, your values, and your gifts. And so we'll start off with purpose, right? And purpose is like, how do you want to impact the world? Steve Jobs famously said in his speech at Stanford graduation, he asked the graduating class, think about how you want to dent the universe. And so your purpose is that big picture idea of how do you want to engage in the world? And most importantly there is like, what are the challenges and the opportunities that exist in the world where you feel that you'd like to see the greatest impact? In other words, if you had an opportunity to go to the end of your life and really look back to this time and think about what was the impact that I had over this period of time, that, what they say, the dash, right, between the birth and the death, the time that you have right now. Really what matters now is between now and the time you pass, how do you use that dash to impact the world in a way that's really going to make a difference to you? Aligning with that big purpose are your values. And your values are the way you choose to show up, and getting crystal clear on who you are and how you show up as it relates to engaging with other people. Are you adventurous? Are you lean towards safety? Are you abundant? Are you courageous? Are you generous? Are you loving? Are you kind or compassionate? And so thinking about how you want to show up in the world and what values you want to allow to emanate from you sets a tone so that you know how to show up in the world. And being consistently having those expectations of yourself and those beliefs really help to inform how you're going to show up. The next is vision. And when I was originally introduced to the idea of doing visions, we've all done them, I'm assuming. And what it was typically, how it was introduced to me is you kind of had like a vision of the future of 10 years. And most of the time was around your professional career, my professional career, that was my experience. And so we'd envision this time out in the future. And while I found it had some value, what I found for myself and many of the people I work with today is it works much better if we have visions that are incorporating different roles that we play. We have a professional life, we have a personal life, we have hobbies, we have community involvement, and really thinking about how do you want those things to evolve and over time. And so you may look out 3 years or 5 years or 10 years and plant a distant vision and then work your way back and have visions that are going to create more clarity for you all the time. And the reason that these things are so important is that this is really going to determine what you're using and what you're seeing in the universe as raw materials to create the life you want. When you begin to have a really clear identity belief that tells you where do you want to go, how do you want to show up, what impact do you want to have, it gives you an opportunity to find the raw materials that otherwise you're going to miss. At any given moment, they estimate that there's more than 1 billion different bits of energy and vibrational information out there in the universe. And we can only process very few pieces of that data, about 260 bits of data at any given moment. And so our senses don't have the ability to see everything. So we're attracting to ourselves that which we're expecting to happen. And so our purpose, our vision, our values, and then ultimately our gifts. And the reason gifts are so important to have clarity around as it relates to your beliefs, believing what you have gifts in, is that gives you a vision of how you're going to engage the world, what tools you're going to use in order to create the vision and to fulfill the purpose that you have. And getting crystal clear on where do you feel energized when you're doing what kind of behavior, what action do you seem to do inordinately well when compared to other people, things that come easily to you. Those are the areas that you want to think about. How do I continue to grow and develop in these areas? Because that's where you're going to expand the most. And so we looked at it, we talked about our purpose, our values, our vision, our gifts, and those all incorporate your identity beliefs. And that's going to play a big role in what you're attracting into your life. Now, as we get into the others' beliefs, I think this has been helpful for me and others that I've coached, is thinking about how do we expand our compassion circle? And what I mean by that is a lot of times people will have a great compassion circle for their family. I love my family. I love whoever. But as we begin to get outside of that, we begin to other people. They're not part of our group. They're not part of the in-group. And as we move further and further away from our in-group, what tends to happen is we move further and further away from that unconditional love and more toward, okay, I have compassion, but not love. I have empathy, but not compassion. I have sympathy, but not empathy. I have pity. I have dislike. I may even have hatred. And so the feelings that we have in the world are the feelings that we are going to experience. And so when we have a situation where we're looking at different groups of people with these different energies, those energies are going to determine what vibrational energy we attract into our lives. So an opportunity for each of us is to think about, where are different groups where we are othering people? Are we othering around religion or race or education or income or health status or nationality? Where is it that you find that you have a tendency to other people and to not bring the unconditional love and compassion toward that group? Because whatever you put out is what you're going to draw back. And so in our lives, when we're thinking about how do we create amazing lives, you're going to think about, how do I expand that compassion circle and look to areas where you have hidden resistance to unconditional love. I know as I've done this exercise myself, I've had a new awareness of places where I've given myself too much space for not bringing the level of unconditional love to different groups. And that's an area where I continue to work, and I am excited about the work that's happening there. Maybe you'll find the same thing to be true. As we drop down into the bottom piece, the global beliefs, a couple different things you want to think, I think are important to think about there. I talked about the danger or safety. And so I've heard it explained once that, sometimes people see the world as being against them. So that would be dangerous. And then on the flip side, some people see the world as being a partner, a collaborator in the life that they want. I've heard it said that I'm an inverse paranoid. I imagine that the world is conspiring to serve me. And so what I'd like you to do is to think about yourself on that spectrum and think about, where do you fall on that spectrum between feeling like the world is against you to feeling like it is a benevolent universe that's actually working in coordination with you for your good. Now, we can't really necessarily determine which of those ways the world shows up, but we can influence it based on what our expectation is. If we expect to see the world being dangerous and against us, then there will be much evidence to make that true. And on the flip side, if we imagine that the world is benevolent and that it is conspiring to serve us, then that, again, is going to be what we're attracting into our lives. And so our identity beliefs, our beliefs about others, and our beliefs about how the universe works are the primary filters that are going to determine what information gets through that first beliefs filter, right? Unlimited opportunity out here. We're going to narrow it down. We're going to attract in and allow into our lives some raw material that we're going to then use to build our lives. And those are the big three that you want to think about engaging with intentionally choosing that are going to then influence your life for good. So now imagine that the light's coming in and we're starting to not just have white light, but we're starting to influence the color of the light. The bottom line of energy, which is the base of the pyramid, that's going to determine the intensity of the light. So imagine that we have light coming in. If we don't have a lot of energy, whatever color light that was, if we don't have the vitality to engage, then the light's not going to be very powerful. Our objective is to create powerful light so that we're able to use the raw materials and make a significant difference. And so what are the factors that impact the energy levels that we have? And I've broken those also into 3 groups. And the 3 groups I would like you to think about. The first one is our nutrition, exercise, and sleep. And so those are just the big 3 columns of our physical vitality. The second area is positive psychology. And in some ways it goes back to our identity beliefs, but it is the belief like how much compassion, how much gratitude, how much forgiveness, how much love, how much connection, how much peace and calm and tranquility are you creating in your life through the practices that you have to engage your psychology? It's interesting to me that often people understand that the exercise they do physically is going to determine how they feel and how their body responds. But far more people think that their emotional energy, the experiences they have emotionally, are just determined, and that they are naturally melancholy, or that they don't have a good focus or attention or mindfulness, rather than seeing those things just like the physical as being elements of who we are that we can impact through the practices that we have. And then the third element of what gives you energy is how are you structuring your life and how are you engaging with it on an ongoing basis in order to elevate the amount of flow that you have. And so flow is a state of consciousness where we feel our best and perform our best. It's where we have rapt attention, where we become one with what we're doing and ourself and time almost disappear. Sometimes they literally leave our consciousness. And so what we're going to do now is talk about what are the things that we can do on the exercise, nutrition, and sleep side. What can we do on the positive psychology side? And how do we build lives that have more flow? So let's start off with the exercise, nutrition, and sleep. And we're going to stay at a relatively high level. And throughout the course here, we'll have conversations that go much more in depth. But we'll start with nutrition. I love the way that Dr. Peter Attia talks about this, and he calls it nutritional biochemistry. And what he's seeking to communicate is that our nutrition engages with us in a very complex way. And so when people are seeking very, very simple, specific diets that are going to work for everyone, and that there's this one biochemistry that's absolutely perfect for everyone, it doesn't really exist. And we have arguments, and I would almost call them like religious arguments around specific different approaches. Somebody's keto or paleo or vegetarian or Mediterranean or carnivore, whatever they happen to be. And there is evidence, and there's books been written that have demonstrated that each of these different approaches has a pretty high level of efficacy when compared to what we call the standard American diet. And so all of these different approaches, we hear, oh my gosh, look at the results that they've had. And they're actually comparing it to the standard American diet. What we want to recognize is, yes, the standard American diet, the way that it's presented, really is not healthy at all, right? And so much of our consumed food is processed. We have these big, huge food manufacturing companies whose intention is to give an abundance of calories at the lowest cost possible. And so they'll sustain themselves for a long period of time on a shelf. So what they're doing is they're processing it. They're putting in all kinds of preservatives. They're driving down the cost. And they're trying to get us addicted to the food, because the more food they sell, the more money they make. And so when they've determined, these food companies, the food scientists have determined, wow, you know what? If these foods are really healthy, the ones that are great-grandparents and grandparents ate. If they're eating that, people don't tend to overeat because they get enough nutrition and they get enough fiber and they find out they're satisfied and they're satiated. And so they stop eating. The food companies are like, wow, we don't want that. What we want to do is let's strip all the nutrition out. Let's take all the fiber out. And hey, I got a great idea. Let's make this food hyper palatable. Let's make it taste better, sweeter, fatter than anything in nature. And so they do. And what that basically does is it ends up having foods that kind of activate those habitual parts of our brain, just like drugs do. And so now we're getting these firings and we want to just continue to eat. And because there's very little nutrition and there's very little fiber, there's nothing that tells our bodies that we're satisfied and satiated, so we continue to eat. So our goals say, okay, we don't want the standard American diet. We can play around those other ones, but let's go to where they are all connected. And where they're all connected is really in whole foods, unprocessed, and you want to get a lot coming out of the ground, right? So you may or may not choose to eat animal products. If you do, my encouragement is choose not to eat those that are manufactured just like the other manufactured products, because the difference between the quality of beef that is manufactured in one of those feedlots versus a natural grass-fed, grass-raised, grass-finished beef, the difference in that animal is huge. And so what you're consuming is radically different. The amount of nutrient is radically different. The lack of toxicity is radically different in the proper meat. And then the other side of it is you want to make sure you're getting a lot of vegetables, a really broad array. And so it's really not that hard to do. Nutrition should not be that hard. Whole foods, big variety, not too much. And I say not too much because if we look at our society, about 2/3 to about 70% of the population in this country is overweight. And what that basically means is they've consumed calories they've never burned off. Fat is just stored energy. And so however you look at it, if we have an overweight problem, we have a consumption problem. We're consuming too much food. So we want to reduce the amount of food we're eating, but make sure that food is really rich in good macronutrients, right? So we want to make sure that we're getting the proteins we need so we can replace the parts of our body and continue to build. We want to make sure we're getting energy. And so carbohydrates play a good role. Fats are essential for a lot of the different, every single cell requires essential fats. And so what we're going to do is look at making sure that we're getting good macros, good healthy macros, and that we're watching and consuming in a way that there's a balanced equation. And that equation is basically energy in, energy out. And you may have often heard that, calories don't really count. And calories absolutely count. They're not the only thing that matters. And part of the reason is that not all calories are burned the same. And so when we say calories in, calories out, it is still the equation. That equation doesn't go away. They're just not all burned the same way. So you can't say if I take in 2,000 calories, if they're different types of calories, they're different foods, they're not all going to create the same amount of net calorie because there's a conversion that's required, et cetera. We don't need to get into all that. But what you want to do is pay attention, watch your portion, and just eat what comes out of the ground. Michael Pollan in his book, In Defense of Food, talked about eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Keep it simple. So let's get into exercise. Exercise, I love the idea of exercise. And we're going to talk about physical exercise, but I just want you to think about the concept of exercise. So exercise, the definition that I like is exercise is placing a demand on the function of a system or a structure that challenges its capacity and forces an adaptation to expand. And so let's think about any kind of exercise, right? So if we think about even a math exercise that you might give your second grader. So that type of exercise, if it challenges that child's capacity in math, it's going to catalyze, it's going to stimulate growth so that they begin to learn new math. The exact same thing happens physically. And so when we think about it, what we're trying to do is create an environment, a physical environment that challenges our current capacity and forces adaptation in all of our physical systems. Now, what do we know to be true about the society within which we live? We know that we've created a system, an environment that can be so comfortable that there's no need for adaptation. We can go through our lives without ever challenging our bodies to do anything. And if we don't, what happens is instead of expanding to meet that demand, it shrinks down to meet the limited demand that we're placing upon it. And that's why so many people, as they age, give up literally decades of quality of life. We age in our society way too soon. At about age 30 to 40, most people start to lose muscle because they're not asking their bodies to demand it. And from an evolutionary perspective, once you've already had your children, there's really no need for you to be around. And so once we get into that 30 to 40 years of age, unstimulated, most people will lose somewhere between 3 and 8 pounds of muscle per decade. Now, the part that's often left out of this conversation is that unstimulated spot. If you continue to stimulate your muscles, right, challenge them, create an environment that demands they grow, you don't lose muscle for a really long time, 70s, 80s, way late. And so you can maintain all your physical capabilities for a really long time. Many people, when they go about exercise, look at it from a perspective of, I'm going to strength train and do cardio. And that's great. But there's so many other elements to think about. What are you doing for your flexibility? Do you really want that to go away? How about your balance? How about your coordination? How about your cardiovascular, respiratory, pulmonary, right? How about the muscular endurance? How about skeletal strength? All of those elements should be challenged in your exercise program. And through here, we'll talk about different ways of going about this. There's tons of different approaches. And the great thing is, if you look at it from a principled basis, you can achieve this in a brief period of time. As little as 1% investment of your day can allow you to stimulate all of those different systems and others as well. So let's talk about sleep. So sleep is one of those things that many of us in our youth were foolish and thought, I'll sleep when I die, not knowing that if I don't sleep, I'll die sooner. Now the research is in, and it is unquestionably a critical element, not just for how long we live, how well we live, how we respond, how our performance is. And to simplify it, almost everybody needs 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Now, there are elements of creating an environment within which we're going to sleep better. We can get into that in more detail. I'll just hit on this highlights. When you're going to bed, you want to try and have a consistent time to go to bed, right? Figure out when that is and go consistently to that time of bed. Wake up consistently at a time. What you're trying to do is get in alignment so you have a rhythm, somewhat in alignment with your circadian rhythms, right? In other words, the way that the day works. You want to follow that. You may be an early bird, you might be a night owl, whatever you are, find it and live with it and move with it. But be consistent. As you go to bed, prior to that, you don't want to be sitting in front of your TV, because within an hour or so, if you have those lights on, what those blue lights in your TV or your phone or whatever it happens to do, it's sending a message to your brain that it's still light outside. The circadian rhythm is getting thrown off. So you want to kind of cut that down. You also want to watch how much you're drinking right before you go to bed, and also eating, because if you give yourself a few hours before going to bed that you've stopped your eating, and maybe a couple hours before with your drinking, you'll find that you sleep much better. If you can create like a cave-like environment with cold, pretty cold, dark, silent, that's how you're going to sleep the best. And what we want to do is think about sleep as a performance art. And you want to engage sleep in a way that's going to allow you to have the great energy. So let's get into the psychology things, right? So positive psychology, I talked a little bit about what are those states for you. What we want to do is try and practice the states that we're looking for. So if mindfulness and is important to you, and you like to be able to control your thoughts and not have them pull you every which way, then just like exercise, there's meditation practices. And there's so many different ways to go about that. The big thing with meditation is learning to be aware of where your thoughts are. and bringing them back to whatever it is you're hoping to focus on. So you may be focusing on your breath or an exercise or a burning candle or whatever it happens to be. But the benefit, what we're really seeking to do is have the awareness when our mind travels so that we can once again pull it back and pay attention to what we want to pay attention to. As it relates to gratitude, gratitude has a huge impact on those filters we talked about, like changing the way that you engage the world. But gratitude is a practice. It's not something that I'm going to just think I'm going to be grateful enough by going through the day and saying thank you when someone opens my door. Gratitude is a practice that you want to engage in your life. Lots of different ways to do it. You can have gratitude journaling. You can have gratitude lists. You can write lots of thank you notes. There's a lot of ways. But whatever you're doing from a gratitude perspective is really going to serve you. Another one, again, we talked about othering, right? So we want to not other. We want to have compassion, growing compassion. That practice of thinking of the people that maybe you have more challenges with and thinking about, how do I bring the same love to them that I bring to my family? How do I expand that circle of compassion to include humanity is a way that you're going to shift your energy. Your personal life experience is going to be enhanced. The grander, the bigger, more inclusive your unconditional love becomes. And another area that we want to look at is forgiveness, because holding on to grudges, I've heard it said, holding on to a grudge is like taking poison and thinking the other person is going to die. So what we're talking about here is, what are you doing to make sure that wherever you have had a resentment, that you do the work to work through it? And what they found is that from peace of mind perspective, that there's nothing that has such a huge effect as releasing resentments. So we talked a little bit about, these are big ones in positive psychology. We'll go much more in detail as we go through this program. We also talked about the exercise, nutrition, and sleep sections. Now we'll talk about flow. So flow is a behavior. It's an approach to life where you're thinking about, I want to peak perform. And we know that when we're in this state of consciousness called flow, that we have rapt attention on whatever it is we're paying attention to, which basically means we are in the present moment. And so what's great is they've been doing so much research, and there are now tools that enable us to see into the brain to see what is going on when we're in these great states, both electrically and neurochemically, and then think about, how do we get there? And so what we know is that what happens inside the brain, we're in these deep states of high performance that feel amazing, and all of us have been there. What we want to do is think about, how do we get there consistently, right? It might be a runner's high. It might be some music you listen to. It might be you doing dance. Some people get there through deep thinking and challenging questions. We can get there through a really engaging movie. Like, what is it that brings you in and gives you that rapt attention? And now what we're going to do is think about, how do you do that at will, consistently in your life? Because research shows the more we're in flow, the more high flow lifestyle we have, the higher the correlation with overall life satisfaction. And so one of the things we want to do is recognize there's different elements there. There's things that we want to build into our lives. And so when you're engaging in a behavior, you want that behavior to be in what they call the challenge skills balance. And that means you want everything you're doing to be pretty challenging, but not so challenging that you break. Stephen Kotler, one of the great researchers in this area, says you want to stretch, not snap. Another way of thinking about it is you want to be right at the edge of your capabilities without going into overwhelm. So the challenge skills corridor really is between overwhelm and boredom. And so when you're going about your day, you want to structure your day so that it's challenging, and that for brief moments in time, like maybe 90 minutes, you're focused on an individual task that's going to grab all your attention. And in doing that, you're going to bring the brain waves from being that scattered, frenetic beta toward alpha theta, which slows it down a lot and gives you more peace. And inside there, you're going to have a really clear objective, right? One of the things that's necessary for flow is a clear goal and immediate feedback. So you want to be paying attention, like, how am I doing on this 90-minute project that I've set out? So you're staying focused. Makes it a game. It's kind of like having a clock when you're playing basketball with your friends. It allows you to stay focused during that period of time. And that's really super important. Another thing is rapt attention. And then there's other elements that we'll get into. There's actually 21 different triggers. So we'll talk about that over time. But today, just those are really the big ones. And then you want to structure your day so you can get as many of those little periods as you want. And when I say as many as you want, if you could get 3, 4, 5 of those little 60 to 90 minute periods of peak performance, of flow, it will change your productivity and it will bring great neurochemistry to your body. And then you also want to make sure that you're getting recovery. And recovery can be lots of different things. It can be a walk in the garden with your spouse or friend or whoever it happens to be. It can be just being out in nature. It can be getting massage, sitting in a sauna, steam room, hot tub, ice plunge. All of those things are elements of recovery. And what we want to do is make sure that we're going hard and we're recovering really well. The biggest element of recovery is the sleep. So we're going to make sure we're getting the sleep, and then we're also going to look at that. And so now we've kind of looked at the bottom, right? We have the 3 different big elements now. Now we're going to look at presence. What is presence? So presence is self-awareness, self-control, empathy, and influence. And self-awareness is being present to the moment so you do not get yourself hijacked. It's feeling your feelings and knowing what those feelings are telling you. In the book, 15 Commitments to Conscious Leadership, they wrote about feeling your emotions all the way through and identified a handful of emotions, just a handful that all of the others are variations of. So you have anger and fear and love and connection, right? So you're looking at different emotions and then thinking about how do we allow these to continue to tell us the messages, but not pull us off track. So the mindfulness that we're practicing down in the energy place is going to play a big role in how self-aware we can be of how we're showing up in the moment. Now, let's say that you are self-aware and you're experiencing this situation. And in that self-awareness, you understand, okay, I've had this emotional feeling. I got a little bit triggered, but I understand what's going on. If we don't have self-control, if you don't have self-control, you're still going to act out of behavior. And so what we want to do is think about how do you kind of self-awareness, self-control includes the space between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who spent time, not by choice, in Auschwitz and several other concentration camps, created a field of psychology called logotherapy. And logotherapy really looks at the idea that we bring meaning to our lives and that we bring meaning in the space between stimulus and response. In other words, something happens, and then we have a chance to define what that means. And one of the things he said is, it's not life's responsibility to bring meaning to you. It's your responsibility to bring meaning to life. And so different things happen in the space between stimulus and response. We want to be able to frame it, give it meaning that gives us power. Sean Aker, the professor at Harvard and the author of Beyond Happiness, called it adding vantage points. And so what we want to be able to do is think about, okay, if I look at it this way, man, am I pissed? Man, I'm really angry. Oh, I was so offended. Maybe not the energy I was hoping to feel. What if I looked at it from over here? What if I considered it from this perspective? What if I brought in another perspective? Now I'm starting to get a place where I have much more energy and choice. And so that's what self-awareness, self-control is about. Empathy is really feeling what others are feeling. It's like having that feeling and understanding how is what's going on in the world right now not only affecting you, but affecting others. And it's so important to know where people are, because if we're going to communicate to them, we have to be able to match where they are. And so self-awareness is going to give you an opportunity to collaborate much more effectively. When you tie self-awareness and empathy together, that's going to give you the opportunity to really create what it is you're looking for. And then the last piece of influence, as we look at that space, influence is the ability to engage with people in an aligned fashion and to strengthen the bond. So you understand the empathy and you're strengthening the bond. And then when it's really connected and you found what it is you aligned on, and you may have had to go all the way up to purpose. In other words, like maybe tactically, the two of you are looking at things radically differently. One person thinks you should do X, you think you should do Y, not alignment. You look at the next thing, the goal that they have for achievement, theirs is different. But often if we go upstream far enough, we look at that place that we have alignment. It may be on our longer term vision, it might be on our purpose. When you find that alignment, that's where you build. And you build alignment and you say, hey, I'm with you here. I see the same thing you do. I appreciate and acknowledge your intention here. And I believe I understand these things, right? I have empathy. I understand these. Let me share with you a little bit different perspective that may also help you see what I see. And so that's how we use our presence to engage with the world and others in a way that's going to be most effective. So now we've looked at white light coming in, and we've realized that our beliefs, our energy, and our presence impacts how that white light is going to move through and be colored. And so if you look at the chart behind me, what I'd like you to do is think about, well, you probably see, there's a full rainbow of spectrums. And so depending on how we're using our beliefs, our energy, and our presence, we can experience life anywhere from feeling like a victim, which would be kind of that real low level of energy, right? The world is against me. Things are happening to me. Fighter energy, things are happening to me. The difference between fighter and victim really is victims feel things are happening to them and they kind of lay down. Fighters feel that things are happening to them and they fight back, often very destructively. Now, they may succeed in a particular narrow frame, but their lives are typically all kinds of repercussions in lots of different ways. When you see the world as happening to you, you're not really engaged in a very effective way. So if we move a little higher up, so the low levels are victim and fighter, right? And in the way they're demonstrated color-wise is orange and red. And those are things that are happening to them. The next level of energy is more engaged, and that's by me energy. Like things, I'm doing this, I'm responsible, I'm making this happen. And obviously that's a higher level of energy than things are happening to me. But the next levels of energy, which are negotiator and contributor, they think they're engaged in the world and making it happen, but they also think there's scarce resources. They're not so afraid. They're not afraid of a dangerous world, but they think there's not enough resources. And so negotiators are trying to build win-lose relationships, and contributors are actually building lose-win relationships because both of them perceive the world to be lacking in sufficient resources. And so if there's not enough resources for everybody, somebody's going to have to go without. And what we know about either win-lose or lose-win is they're both temporary, because the other side of that, even if it's the person that created it, it's not going to be sustainable. I mean, often what happens when people are coming from a place of contributor, they have a strong purpose, they're excited, inspired about what they're doing, but often over time what happens is it sinks down and becomes victim energy, right? So they're coming in and they're contributing, but they're not getting their fair share back, right? Because they negotiated for lose-win. And so when that happens, what happens is they start to sink down. And so neither negotiator or contributor actually allows for the creation of sustainable relationships. So that's where you have a lot of different relationships coming and going, people moving in and out of one another's lives and not building something together. Now, the next level of energy that we look at, the next couple of levels of energy are actually what we call as through me. Like this is happening through me. In other words, we're part of a universe where stuff is happening and I'm a conduit, but I'm not in control. I'm accepting and aligning and moving with and dancing with the universe that's showing up. And there's a couple different places where that shows up. And these are collaborator. I'm going to do some work with you on this project and I'm expecting it to be a win-win and I'm trying to create a win-win for you. And then the next higher level is partner. It's not only am I engaged in this transaction with you where we're creating a win-win, but I'm actually seeing you as somebody that I want to build something with that's sustainable. That's about building a network, right? When you think about building a network, that is a partnering energy. You're thinking about how do I partner with these people over time to consistently allow them to bring their unique gifts, their zones of genius to whatever it is you're seeking to create. And by continually building and allowing people to know that you're building win-win-win relationships, it allows them to lean in, have greater levels of trust. And so the speed of performance increases as we're moving up that range, right? So as we're moving up from to me, by me to through me, we've moved way up in that energy level. And then the final level of energy is what we call co-creation. It's actually very similar to just being in pure flow. And that level of energy is as me. And that is the idea that you are one with the universe. And in flow, when we're in a state of flow, we become one with what we're doing. So if you think about states where people often get in flow consistently, like surfing or skiing or dancing and things like that, you become one with the music or one with the wave or one with the mountain or whatever it happens to be, one with the project, one with. And it's a recognition that there is no separation. It's a recognition of the universe, right? One verse, right? One song, one universe. It's when the recognition that we're working in that way as me. And what happens is it allows us to fearlessly contribute, to wholeheartedly contribute our greatest gifts, our greatest energy, with the full confidence that the universe is going to reward us and take care of us without having to count the nickels and dimes, right? At the lower levels of energy, like negotiator and contributor, when you think there's a limited pie, everybody's trying to get theirs. As you move up the levels of energy, it allows us to know that the universe is going to care for us. And our opportunity is to wholeheartedly contribute our gifts in areas that align with what they call our intrinsic motivators. And that is like, what are you curious about? What are you passionate about? And what is your purpose? Again, that brings us back to our identity beliefs. But what we want to do is think about, how do you have gifts? What gifts do you have? How can you contribute as much as possible to the things that you care about with wholehearted commitment, knowing that that is going to elevate your joy and your life experience to the highest level? And so I'm really grateful for you to be here today. I'm excited about this podcast as we move forward. What we'll be doing is interviewing many interesting people and looking at their lives and exploring how their great choices and even some of their mistakes have been impacted by and have resulted in different outcomes based on these same elements that are influencing your life. Your beliefs, your energy, and your presence play a huge role in allowing you to choose to live at a high level of vibrational energy and to collaborate, partner, and co-create in a world with unlimited opportunity. My intention is to use this podcast as a tool to help you see how to tap into those gifts consistently so you create the life of your desire. Thank you so much, and I hope you continue to pay attention to us on a weekly basis. Thank you.